We are picking up where we left off with regard to the parables. We have been looking through them. There are approximately 40 parables that Jesus told, depending on how you divide them. This morning, we want to look at a larger chunk of scripture that will let us see a number of these parables. I have labeled the message this morning, the 10 talents, as was read to us. Truth be known, that's kind of a misnomer. We are going to be talking about the 10 talents, but not just the 10 talents. Because this passage in Matthew 25, beginning at verse 14, is really the crux of a greater context. And so in order for us to really appreciate all that's going on within this parable, I need to take you backwards quite a little passage, quite a little ways in Scripture, all the way to the beginning of Matthew chapter 24. So we're going to work through Matthew 24, all the way through 24, and mostly into 25. So what I'm basically saying is, put your tray tables and seat backs in their locked and upright position, because we need to get down the runway. We've got a lot of ground to cover. The beginning of Matthew 24 is probably familiar to you. If you know your Bible at all, this is the passage that often we go to when we're discussing future things. Jesus left the temple, was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple, but he answered them. You see all these? Do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. Jesus predicts the destruction of the temple, and he begins to pique their interest in his discussing this destruction, which takes place in 70 AD, within the generation of the disciples. And there is much written about that. I spoke about that a few weeks ago, that Judaism was basically put to an end, and all the books and rabbis and clans and all the Jewish lines are gone. And the destruction of Jerusalem happened. And when Jesus speaks about this, he piques their interest. And they begin to, as he makes this prediction of something to happen in the future, they're thinking, well, what else is going to happen? So he sat down on the Mount of Olives. The disciples came to him privately. Now, I just want to remind us that all of what we're about to read with the 10 talents and the other parables, all of this takes place in a private setting. Jesus is speaking to his 12 disciples. And that's a key point in remembering that even the 10 talents is a parable to his disciples, and to that it would be us. And this is not a parable spoken to the general populace. It is for his people. So he's speaking to them privately. Tell us when these things will be. What will be the sign of your coming and the close of the age? So this is why we find this passage so interesting, because Jesus goes into beginning to tell of future things. Now, which is not our subject this morning. Some of you may be relieved and some of you may be disappointed, but you know the passage, many will come in my name, lead many astray. There will be wars and rumors of wars, and he goes on to explain in this text. But later on in verse 36, this familiar phrase comes out. But concerning that day and that hour, now he's talking about his second coming, as we would call it. Not even the angels, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven nor the Son, but the Father only. This is a well-known text, of course, to us, that this second coming, we do not have a date on it. We have no idea when this will take place. And so begins a series of parables based on the fact that Jesus is discussing the notion of future things. He's talking about his second coming. He's talking about his return to set up his rule and reign on earth that we would know and we would call, as New Testament believers, the millennial kingdom. So he begins to express to them what this is going to look like this period of time. And it begs the question, well, how do we wait for this second coming? Do we sell everything we have, throw all our money into Bibles overseas, and go and live in a cave somewhere and just wait for the end to happen? How do we wait? What should waiting look like for us? And so he gives us 4 principles of waiting on this subject of the second coming. You'll see as we look at this following text, Jesus tells his disciples to wait for Jesus' return in such a way that they're not caught by surprise. This is a lesson for us, and we have talked about this in times past. So he goes on to say this: don't be caught by surprise. For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day when Noah entered the ark. Please note that this is not a description of the evil days of Noah. This is a description of the normalcy of life in the time of Noah. They were eating, drinking, marrying, given in marriage, having children, graduating from high school, getting jobs, looking for promotion, going on vacation. It was the normalcy of life. They had absolutely no clue. They were without any understanding of what was going to take place until the day Noah entered the ark, and they were unaware until the flood came and swept them away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. In the same way, the world will be utterly and absolutely clueless. So Jesus warns his disciples our waiting should look like in such a way that we're not caught off guard, that we're not swept up in the excitement of the age, that we somehow put in the back of our mind that that's not going to happen. He gives some examples. Then two will be in the field. This would have been a particular common theme. A father and a brother, or a father and a son, or two men who knew each other working in the field. One will be taken, one will be left. Now, in keeping with the context of being swept away by the flood, that being taken away is taken away in judgment. The suddenness of normalcy of work, one day everything's normal, and the next day suddenly everything's changed, just like that. Two will be grinding at the mill. Again, it would have been sisters or mother-daughter, and they would grind at the mill. The hand mill would have allowed them to wind the stone halfway, and then as the handle comes in front of you, you would grab it and wing it around to the person who's sitting across from you, who would take the handle and turn it around, and you would grind. And you did this every day to make your meal. And you needed two people to work the mill. But one will be taken. One will be taken in judgment, and one left. Therefore, stay awake. Just like that is what Jesus is saying. For you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. So he gives another example. But know this, if the master of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. That only makes sense. No one plans for a burglary. If you did, you would have the police hiding in the closet, and as soon as they open the closet, how convenient, they get arrested. That's not how it works. You don't plan for these things, and Jesus just uses this as an illustration to say, in the same way, you will be completely unawares. The world will be completely unawares. Therefore, you also must be ready. So how do we wait? We wait in such a way that we understand that this is going to come in an hour that we do not expect. And so Jesus begins this series of parables talking about final things and reminding us what waiting looks like. We're not to be caught by surprise. Further to that, he points out that our waiting for Jesus' return is to be done in such a way that we know it's not a passive waiting, but it's an acknowledgement or a realization that at the end of that waiting, there will be an accounting. That this is not something for us to sit passively on our haunches and twiddle our thumbs and just do time waiting to die, or waiting for Jesus to return. At the end of that return, there's going to be an opening of the books, an accounting of what kind of a servant we were. Wait in such a way with this in mind. And he tells this little vignette, this little parable. Who then is the faithful and wise servant? And I have to just pause here because this comes up again when we get to the subject of the 10 talents. I know I'm taxing your patience by working through this long text. I appreciate you tracking with me. The word servant is actually the word for slave. The English translators take the word doulos and put it into English as the word servant because we find the word slave has too much baggage, too much misunderstanding, too much of a negative connotation to it. And so we don't translate that word, that slave, into an English word slave, and we use the word servant. But truly, the word actually is slave, and that has a totally different idea than we have in our 21st century minds, where we think of slavery as something that's unethical, that's something to do with your ethnicity, your background, the color of your skin, whatever the case, and so you are being oppressed because of slavery. And we take that baggage and we put that on that word, and it confuses us. But in the first century, slavery was not like that. It was very common. It was a legal form of you paying off your debt. If you were to take out a mortgage on a home and then you suddenly lost your job and weren't able to make your payments, then you knew when you signed for that mortgage, you knew this. that the only way you would pay off your debt was to then become a servant, or is the word used in the first century, to become a doulos, a slave of the person who you borrowed from. You would work off your debt, and they would become your master, and oftentimes these were very legitimate and cordial relationships. There was nothing cruel or vicious about these relationships. It was just the way it worked. If you found yourself, whatever stratus, and some of these people were, librarians and mathematicians, and they knew geometry and architecture, and suddenly, as educated as they were, they found themselves slaves. So these were not, the bottom of the barrel society, and so they found themselves in a position where the master would realize, hey, you've got some particular skills that will help me in my business. While you work off your debt, here's what I'm going to get you to do. And you would work for free. He would provide for you, and you would work until your debt was paid, and then you were free. So this is the notion of this relationship that Jesus is borrowing. He is not advocating for slavery. He is simply borrowing the phenomena of the culture and using that as an illustration. He's not for slavery any more than he is for thievery when he used the illustration of a thief coming in the night. He's not suggesting this is a good vocation. He's just borrowing what they knew. So understand this. Who then is the faithful and wise slave or servant? Now this man is indentured to, it's a good word, isn't it? Indentured to a master. Indentured means they use the same dentures. No, I don't think it does. It means he's in debt to him, okay? So there's a slave-master relationship, which means the slave doesn't have his own mind about the issue. Okay? He gets his orders. It's almost like a military situation. He gets his orders. This was the contract when he borrowed money to begin with. If you go into debt, if you need this money, here's what's going to happen. And you knew this. So now you become under the rule of this master, the faithful and wise servant who his master has set over his household to give them their food at the proper time. So this man has come in as a slave, as a servant under this master, and he's now the head chef, the butler. I don't know. What do you have for cooking your meals at your house? Whatever you call your servant, that's what this guy is. Okay? So he's there and he's told to fix the meals at proper times. That makes sense. That's his role, and that's what he has to do. Breakfast is at 9, lunch is at noon, dinner's at 5, whatever the case. So he does this. Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Even the simple menial task of watching the time, you notice the time motif? The time of what time and being ready for the time. Blessed be when his master so comes, because the master's away it seems. Truly I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions. If he's faithful, if he proves himself when the master comes and finds him working, he'll receive a bigger job. You're good in the kitchen. Maybe you should run the whole house. But if that wicked servant says to himself, my master is delayed. I was supposed to have breakfast at 9 o'clock. It's hot and steaming on the table. He didn't even tell me. He left last night. He's gone on a business trip. I'm supposed to have lunch now at noon because those are my orders. But he's probably not even going to come back for noon. I don't even know what's happening. So why should I work? So you take on your own mind. You decide your own way. You decide to go against your own orders as a slave. But if that wicked servant says to himself, my master is delayed, and begins to beat his fellow servants, lords it over them like he's in charge, and eats and drinks with drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him. Do you see this? At an hour that he does not know. He's gone on a trip. He had no idea when he's going to come back, but this servant sees an opportunity to go and do his own thing and go maverick, and he does. And suddenly, the next morning, breakfast is not on the table. The master comes in and says, you're my slave. I've given you the role. Why didn't you do this? He will cut him in pieces and put him with the hypocrite. That sounds harsh, and it is, but this would be a legal recompense from a master-slave relationship. He will cut him in pieces and put him with the hypocrites. In that place, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So Jesus is saying to his disciples, catch this, I'm coming. You don't know when I'm coming, but I'm going to come, so don't by surprise, and I'm going to come in such a way that understand this, that don't get lazy. Don't think that just because I haven't showed up, you can go do whatever you want nilly-willy. Understand that when I come, what I've given you to do, you are going to be called to account for it. And so he continues to explain to them. How should I wait? And he gives them another parable, a famous parable from the beginning of Matthew 25. Wait for Jesus' return, knowing that his return may not be for a long time. This actually makes a difference to us. If we knew, this is impossible, let's just pretend for a moment, since you know how to pretend, you remember this from when you were 6 and 7. We're going to pretend that we now know, how we know, I don't know, that the second coming is for sure happening next month. We're pretending, people. No one can know this. Don't get weird on me. I'm not making a proclamation. I'm just suggesting somehow, by some weird happenstance, this becomes known to us. Would it not change the way we live? Would it not decide now, well, I guess I won't trade in that car, or maybe I won't bother with that promotion, or yeah, we were going to buy a house, I guess we're not, well, forget about entering school or worrying about my school loans. That's cool. Whatever the case, you suddenly realize that everything would take on a different focus. Suddenly, your bank account, whatever, it would seem different. It's hard for us to imagine because we're not in that position. But if it's going to be a long time, what should that look like? How should we live? Well, Jesus explains a parable to give this practical application in regards to his return being delayed. The kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who, in our context, we would say 10 bridesmaids, if you will, who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. So instantaneously, we're brought into a first century scene that doesn't mean a whole lot to our 21st century ears because we know nothing of this at our weddings. At our weddings, the bride is the queen. I was going to say the king, that makes no sense. The bride calls the shots. The bride is the center of attention, and rightly so. Why is that? Because traditionally, the bride's family is paying for the wedding. But in the first century, it was the groom that paid for the wedding. And so the groom was the center of attention. That's not to say that he was any more important in any sense, but that he had been saving up to fulfill this contract that his parents and another set of parents had made for this woman and him to be betrothed. This is why sometimes the man was much older in the first century when he got married, because he had to save up all kinds of money because he had to have a wedding. And he had to pay for the wedding. And the wedding began at his house. Not the bride's house, and the bride was not present. And he would gather his family and his friends and his neighbors, and they would come to his house, and they would begin to celebrate. And the celebration would go on depending on how wealthy the man was. It could go on for a day, 2 days, 5 days, a week, depending on how much he wanted to show off, how much he wanted to show his affection to his bride. Whatever the case, if he was poor, it would last for 10 minutes. Whatever the case, he would have a little celebration at his house. So because it's open-ended, there's no set time when the groom would be known to be leaving his house. Then a procession would go through the streets with all his family and all those people who were at the party, and they would go through the streets to the bride's house. And you never knew when this was going to take place because you didn't know how long his party would go on. And this is what happened, we would surmise, when Jesus did his first miracle. He was at one of these situations, and the party was to go on, but they ran out of wine. Mary comes to Jesus, and you know the story. So, here we are, thrust into this first century scene. The kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. They grab lamps because, let's say it's 1 p.m, but they don't know how long it's going to be before the groom comes, so they need some lamps. They might pack a cheese sandwich too, I have no idea. 5 of them were foolish, 5 were wise. The numbers are not important in this. It's the principle of the thing. For when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them. They grabbed them in haste and ran out. We may need it, we may not, let's just go. But the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. That's the scene. They run off to the bride's house, and they're waiting for the groom. As the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and slept. This is not a negative thing. This is just to show how long of an issue this party went on. But at midnight, finally, there was a cry. Here's the bridegroom. Come out to meet him. So the bridesmaids, 10 virgins, as they would say in the first century, jump up, and they now know it's dark, and in darkness, you can't run out and join the crowd because you have to prove your worth. You can't be some, pardon my French, scallywag who wants to party crash and get in on the free food. You have to show up like you belong there, and so you would need a lamp to enlighten your face, to demonstrate that you are part of the crowd. You were not hiding in the shadows. So they jumped up, it's dark, it's midnight. Grab those lamps we brought. Then all the virgins rose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. But the wise answered, saying, since there will not be enough for us and for you, rather go to the dealers and buy for yourselves. This is not them being mean. This is not them being selfish. This is not them being cruel. This is the practical outflow of what had happened. We don't have enough oil for us and you. We'll all run out. We brought enough for us. You know what you have to do if you need oil? Go to the dealer and buy the oil. So they run down the street to find the 24-hour 7-Eleven, which doesn't exist. So they're banging on doors at every place, hoping they can buy some oil. The principle that is evident here is that you cannot share your oil with someone who doesn't have it. You can only tell them where to find the oil. I cannot tell you what you need I can tell you rather where you can find what you need to enter into the kingdom of heaven. I can tell you how you can find the oil of the Holy Spirit, if you will. I can tell you what you need to know that you're a part of the kingdom of God, but I have no ability to give that to you. It is not transferable from my heart to your heart. Everybody has to get their own oil. Everybody has to do their own preparation for when the bridegroom comes. Everybody has to be ready for themselves. This is not something I can do for you. This is not something your mother can do just because she brought you to church. This is not something somebody else does because they decided to baptize you. This is something that you decide for yourself to be prepared of your own accord when the bridegroom comes. And if you have delayed and been amongst the bridal party and sat amongst them and looked like you behaved amongst the bridal party and belonged among the bridal party, and suddenly the bridegroom comes and you realize you're missing something, it's going to be too late. This is the point of the parable. Prepare for the coming in such a way that you know you are ready, that you are prepared. And so, while they were going to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. Now, this doesn't necessarily depict a realistic situation. The bridegroom, in reality, may have let these stragglers come in, but for the sake of the parable and for the sake of the clarity of what it's teaching, once the door is shut, the door is shut. The opportunity is now, and if you fail at that opportunity, you fail utterly. Afterwards, other virgins came also, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. We found our oil. We finally got what we need. But he answered, truly, I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour. So, the warning comes to be ready. And Jesus tells us not only not to be caught by surprise, not only to realize that we'll be giving an accounting, but to know that his return may be long delayed, and we need to live our lives in light of the fact that it may be a long time. We need to prepare for what is to come. We don't know what that is. So, what would that be in practical terms? Plan for your retirement. Buy life insurance. Plan for your children's future. But knowing the whole time and keeping a balance that none of these things ultimately matter. That you're going to be held to account for how we live our lives now. That when the second coming does arrive, that all of this means nothing. We don't live for the now, but we plan recognizing that we must pass on to the next generation. We built Bible schools, and we built situations where send missionaries out, where they can establish works, where the kingdom can be passed on to the next generation. Because we don't know how long it will be delayed. We are planning for a long delay, knowing that it could come in 5 minutes from now. We live with a long view talent as being able to tap dance or juggle, breathe water, whatever your talent would be. I have no idea. You know this from the last time we talked about this. A talent is 6,000 denarii. 1 denarii is 1 day's work. So 1 talent is about 20 years of work. So what we're talking about is not a talent. It's money. Don't be confused by that. A talent is the ability to do something in our language. That's not what Jesus is referring to. The word talaton means coinage. So he gives the first one 5 talents. You want to put it in a better way to say this? 5 bags of money. Does that help us? The next one gets 2 bags of money. Lots of money. How much is irrelevant to us? The point is, they have been given and entrusted a serious amount of cash. The third one gets 1 talent of money. And so they go off, and they do what they do with their money, with their master's money. Not their money, their master's money. He would receive the 5 talents, went at once. He's excited about this. In the Greek, that's at the beginning of the sentence, which means this is the thing you're to notice. He was immediately excited by the notion. He couldn't wait to serve his master, and he traded with them. He bought land, whatever he did. I don't know, use your imagination. He bought land, and he sold the wheat, and then realized he had money, some wheat, so he bought a bakery, started selling bread, realized that the bread was popular, needed some jam, bought some berries, started making jam, and went into business, became an entrepreneur. Before long, this guy made all kinds of money. I don't know how he did it. You don't know either. But he made money. So he also had the 2 talents, did the same thing. He took the money, he found some way to invest it. He found some guy making widgets, realized that he had the best widgets on earth, put it on the internet. Before you know, he was the widget king. He made money. That's the idea of the story. But, you know the drill. The one who had received 1 talent did what people do in those days, because when they want to hide something, dug it in the ground and hid his master's money. And so you see the contrast. Now, after a long time, the master of those servants came, and it was Judgment Day. Came for the settling of accounts. I went away, I gave you a task, I told you what to do, I am now calling you to account. He who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here, I've made 5 more talents. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. Whoa, 5 bags of gold. It's probably worth millions of dollars. And he says, you've been faithful over a little? This is a very rich master. You can see the picture between the servants, that's us, and our master, that's Christ himself. You've been faithful over a little. You thought you were doing a big job? That is nothing. So I will set you over much. What does that mean? I don't know what you picture heaven to be like. Sometimes we think of it as pretty boring. Long white robes, sitting on fluffy clouds, playing boring harps, trying to find something to do. I don't know. Who wants to go there? I have no idea. The streets sound slippery. They're made of gold. I don't know what the deal is, why we think somehow this is the notion that heaven should be. This is nothing of heaven. All we know is very little in the great scheme of things, but what we see of it is that there's work to be done. We work here for what we've done is we've been faithful over very little. Now, I'm going to set you over much. Wow. The ones who are faithful here, somehow the task becomes so much greater. Enter into the joy of your master. This is unheard of. This is revolutionary. This is scandalous. That a master would say to his slave, enter into my joy. That doesn't happen. What kind of a relationship does this master have with his servants? And so it also with the one who had 2 talents. He came forward saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here, I've made 2 more. You know the drill. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. Now the 5, the 2, the 1, this had no bearing. The numbers have nothing to do with anything for us, particularly in terms of one being superior to the other. It's just to represent who you are and who I am. Are you a 5-talent person or a 2-talent person or a 1-talent person? I don't know. What is your gifts and opportunities? How is it that you serve the Lord? Where do you invest your time and energies? What has God given you to do with what you have? Are you living your life for you, or are you living your life for the kingdom? That's the point of the parable. Whatever your situation, you have been given and granted your life and all that you have and all that you know for the purposes of God's kingdom. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man. Now, does that sound like the master so far? Enter into the joy of your servant. What, your master, what? Does this sound like a hard master? This man is just declaring his own opinion. I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, gathering where you scattered no seed. What is that saying? You know, your neighbor plants the seed, you jump the fence and steal his stuff. That's what he's saying. You take what doesn't belong to you. I work for you. I make the money. And what happens? Who gets the money? Me? No, you. So I know that you're pretty tough, that you're harsh, that you're cruel, that you're demanding, that you're vindictive. This is the way that the world sees God. This is the way that people understand God to be. He's not fair. He's not just. How dare he bring justice to a situation? How dare he respond and bring justice to somebody who's out of line? You are just cruel and mean and vicious. So I was afraid. I didn't trust you. If I failed, I'd lose my life. If I succeeded, you take the money, I get nothing. So I hid it in the ground. So here is exactly what you gave me, exactly the 1 talent. I didn't steal it. Self-justifying all the way through. You're the tyrant. You're the difficult person. You're the one with the problem. I haven't done anything wrong. Here's exactly what you gave me, so we're all square and even. But this man has completely forgotten that he is a slave. And a slave has no mind of his own. A slave is given his orders, and he's to fulfill his orders. And so his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant. Your opinion of me is, or you knew that I reap where I have not sown, gathered where I scattered no seed. That's what you think of me? Then you should have done the sensible thing. At the very least, you should have invested my money with the bankers. And then at my coming, I would at least received interest. I would at least have received what was my own, the 1 talent plus some interest. But you did nothing. So, take the talent from him, give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has, will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away, and cast with the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And the judgment, the righteous judgment, falls on the worthless servant. So, this whole context of these parables is about the coming of the Lord and how we should wait. What have we discussed this morning? Let me try my best to somehow put a bow on this. Land this puppy on the proper runway. We're to wait for Jesus in such a way that we're not the ones caught by surprise. We're not so caught up, so confused by the world, so enamored with the things that life gives us, that we actually forget that there's an end to all things, and that return could come even within our lifetime. And we're to live our lives in such a way that we know that at the end of our lives, we give an account for our lives. That we recognize that at that return, we then have to bear testimony to what we've done. Have we been a good servant? Have we been a lazy servant? And we wait for Jesus' return, knowing that return may not be in our lifetime. So that doesn't mean we go off nilly-willy and do whatever we want. We stay focused on the task at hand. We work for the kingdom. We build the kingdom. We labor for the kingdom. We establish the kingdom. We extend the kingdom. We are a kingdom people at kingdom work, knowing that the king may not come within our lifetime. But we also know that what he's given us, we're going to be held to account. We wait for Jesus' return as those commissioned to improve the kingdom, to build and establish that work. What are you doing with your talents? I don't mean your abilities. I mean your bags of gold, whatever they represent to you. Your life in whatever aspects. Not only your abilities, but not only your finances, but your opportunities and all that's come to you. Are you using it to establish for yourself work before God? Do you recognize we will be held account for the way that we live our lives? And this is what Jesus tried to teach his disciples, because these are the stories Jesus told.